I present myself. This is Massimo Magliocco from ST Microelectronics in Geneva. I will speak about the long-term forecasting, and I'll try to do this going through some specific paradox, because I think that the topics of the long-term forecasting is something tricky, more tricky than the short-term, because we are far away, so people tend to say, okay, it's far, we cannot really foresee what the future will be. And at the end of the day, we end up to more than through linear logic to go through some specific paradox, to go more into some interesting detail. So let's start from some very inspiring picture. I always like Scott Adams because it's very, very appropriate every time on any subject. And this is particularly for the long term, because sometimes it's such as you don't accomplish anything. So let's move. Who I am, once more, I'm Massimo Magliocco. I have a background in physics, so a scientific background that I lost along the way, clearly, because then dealing with the long-term planning, you just multiply, divide, but nothing more. The Schrödinger equation is lost. But I kept the understanding of the numbers and the love, the sensitivity for the numbers, which is quite an important asset when dealing with the long-term planning. The other point, the other pillar I try to leverage on is the sailing experience that I have as a sailing instructor. And here, long before starting the planning, I realized that sailing gives you the need to make scenarios. When you sail in rough condition, maybe you have not an experienced crew, and you have to choose what to do overnight, where to stop, maybe the wind is increasing. So the better is you make some scenario planning and you try to analyze what if the various conditions should materialize based on a risk assessment that you practically do. So these I learned before entering in the supply chain area, but then I realized that it was a good experience to be used inside this subject. So I will go through three main targets. I will try to somehow discuss with you how to make the long-term planning more robust. I will try to discuss about the major traps about long-term planning, such as too far to take a decision, the one that I was introducing before. This is related to a simple experience I had in end of 2015 while discussing with some division director, and we were pushing them to qualify a certain technology in the foundry, because we were, based on our 5 years plan, we were just foreseeing that there should have been a shortage in capacity for such specific technology in around 2018, that is next year. And so the answer was, okay, yes, very interesting, but you know, 2018 is far away. It's so far away, we don't even know next quarter what will it be. So, okay, but you know, based on the evidence that we have, no, but it's far. Okay, but we pushed, and so we moved to a more, let's say, technical meeting, more, let's say, starting to see how to make the things proceed. At this point, the same division director said, okay, you know what? Now we want to move it to foundry, but now it's too late. Okay, now it's too late. 2 months ago, it was too far. Now it's too late. But you know, because we have to qualify the technology, then there is the customer. Okay, so if before it was too late, now it's too far. So let's try to understand that in this kind of activity, that long-term planning, you always will have to deal with such difficulties, because the things are not really evident. They are not really the next day emergency. Nevertheless, you have to push towards certain decision, towards certain steps in order to not to be too late when at the end you will arrive there. So, and then target number 3, I have a very challenging target, how to deal with the huge amount of data which are involved in such an activity. So we have quite a long journey. I will try to make this journey through some experience that I collected inside STMicro, even though I will not be able to share too many data because the company doesn't want really to share the actual data. So the agenda is quite easy. Let's go first through an overview about my company, STMicroelectronics. How many of you know STMicro? A few of them? Because you play with the stock market, or you are interested in microelectronics? Okay, so everybody knows clearly the final customers. Then the more you move through the supply chain, the less clearly the people knows about the various suppliers. So if I name to you the wafer suppliers, most of you probably does not even know. So we will go through the STMicro and the semiconductor market and what is related to this specific market, what are the main challenges. And then we can go through the three targets, and we leave some space for the question and answer, but we can also stop maybe at each of these chapters to have your direct interaction in case. Okay, about ST. So this was approved by the company, so I'm safe. This is the company. This is the vision of the company. So what is the point? We are a big multinational company. The sales in 2016 were about 7 billion. 2017 will be more than 8, which is a great jump from last year. Also, the stock market appreciated a lot, so we increased our share largely during this last year, mostly concentrated in France and Italy because of historical reason, but we are also spread around the world with our main fabs located in, once more, in France, in Italy, but also in Asia, in Singapore, and some back-end plants located in Philippines, in Morocco, so we are quite spread, so we are really multicultural and multinational company. The employees are about 44,000, and there is a huge amount of investment on R&D, so because the high tech requires a continuous update on this. So main pillars, main market we address now have been somehow branded through this smart something approach, meaning smart things, smart home and city, smart industry, smart driving. It are quite straightforward. Smart driving means whatever makes the driving smarter. So we are inside most of the car makers, especially the more innovative one. Not sure if I can say, but okay, we are in Tesla, where we are developing this cancel. This we are here. We are working for the autonomous driving, which is quite really the next future of driving. This is not a really good photo because it's, I think, it's not really politically correct. Because anyway, you should have the hands on the wheel. We are supposed to support the green transition that is making the engine more efficient, and clearly the connectivity. The connectivity is strictly related also to the autonomous driving, because most of the autonomous driving is related to the mapping, to the connection with the internet, and so on and so forth. So it's really quite an interconnected topic. Then the smart things are all the gadgets that you can wear, whatever, the Fitbit, some watches. The smart home and city is, once more, whatever can make the city and the home smarter in terms of control of temperature, control of consumption, transportation, or whatever you can guess. And the smart industry is exactly the same. That is how to make the industry more efficient. So these are the main pillars where the company is focalizing. And this is through the organization in 6 main subgroups, which I listed here, which are the automotive, we're clearly addressing the automotive market, the discrete and power transistor, which is more addressing the industrial part, the analog industrial power conversion IC. Here, this is really quite a booming sector, for example, for the wireless charger. I guess all of you know now that you have just to plug, not to plug, but just to place your phone on a platform that will charge it automatically. And this is a big innovation that is spreading almost around all the next mobile. The MEMS, specialized image sensor, even there is a strong booming for the imaging. I don't know if you know about the iPhone X, iPhone 10, where there is this evolution of the facial recognition. So all what is related to facial recognition, to augmented reality, this is a topic of really huge interest. Then there is the digital ASIC, which is related more to networking, like Cisco, Siena, these kind of companies. And the general purpose secure MCU is more related to all what is the secure transition for banking. You know, the smart cards, also the transition with the phone, the payment. So here, all this kind of transition must go through some secure element inside the chip, which is inside, for example, your telephone. You cannot have any chip, but a specific chip that has some security protocol inside. So this is just to give you a quick overview. So the semiconductor market is strictly related to the electronic market, clearly, which is strictly related to the GDP. So somehow we fluctuate in synchronized with the GDP and consequently the electronic. So what is this mass? This mass is the variation of the GDP. And as you see, the GDP can change extremely in a strong way from one year to the other. And the semiconductor market reacts with an amplified excursion. So this means that our market feels a lot of nervosity. This comes into a lot of complexity in terms of inventories that suddenly are accumulating or are disappearing. So all in all, it's quite a nervous market. So it's quite difficult to follow just because of this nervosity and the difficulties to predict. The main challenges associated to this market, I will try to list here. So one is, as anticipated, is the volatility of the market. So clearly, as the market can change quickly, we are in this moment in an upside moment, but everybody expects that sooner or later there will be downside. But nobody knows exactly when the downside will arrive. So nobody can predict if it will be in 6 months from now or in 1 year. Everybody expects that there will be a downturn, but nobody can tell when this downturn will happen. And finally, not finally, because there are another slide, it is a capital-intensive market. So we spend a lot of money for the equipment. And if you correlate this lot of money that you spend with the volatility of the market, you understand that the planning becomes quite, let's say, an easy target for the CFO to address the problems. I mean, because if you spend money and then the downturns arrives, clearly this is a big issue because we will have invested capex and you will not have used it. So these are part of the challenges, but we have other challenges. The other challenge is that the capacity setup is long. When we typically separate our production process into 2 main blocks, the front end and the back end. The front end is where we really produce the wafers. So we start from 18-inch, 12-inch wafers. We make several steps of masking, deposition, etching, and so on. And we arrive to a final wafers of integrated circuits, okay? The second step is named the back end, where the wafers is sewed, is put inside packages, is assembled. The first part, the front end, is more expensive. The equipment are more costly, while the second part is shorter in time and less expensive. So for the front end part, the delivery time for the equipment can be, to set up an equipment can be more than 1 year, And also the delivery time are becoming longer and longer just because we are in a booming situation. So this is clearly a challenge, because from when you decided to increase your capacity to when your capacity will be really available, it will pass 1 year and more. Then you have to qualify and so on. Then we have another challenge, that we have a big semiconductor buyers. So Samsung, Apple, this kind of guys, if they move from one supplier to another, they will move a huge amount of chips and of demand. So this will unbalance quickly the demand that you see into your forecasting. And finally, we are a broad range company. So this is specific of ST, so we produce from the small value power to the high value integrated circuit. So this is another complexity versus some other companies that maybe do just memories, so it's more simple as they are all similar. So this is very bad sketch of the planning cycle, just to highlight that we work with some quarterly exercise of 5 years, 2 years plan. So once a year we make a 5 years plan, and then we make a quarterly 2 years or a 3 years plan. Clearly, one of these, the one that we are actually working on, includes the budget. And then we have a monthly operation plan, sales and operation plan, which target only 1 year of horizon. So this is all the process where the capacity somehow is built, and then we have all the process where the capacity is used. I work particularly in the mid and long term. No, let's say that I'm less involved in the second part. So let's move to the paradoxes, because they are the really interesting way to address this point. So the first is concerning the making the planning something more robust. So here I found very interesting this book from Michael Raynor, which is named The Strategy Paradox. This is from 2007, but it's really still quite a very actual one. And the theory, the idea of the book is that you say, okay, there are some companies that have made very good product development. They did whatever they had to do in order to make the product successful. Nevertheless, they failed. So, and why they failed? Because somehow they committed on something that was supposed to happen a long time after, and this future is quite unpredictable. So he makes some examples, such as, I don't know, you are quite young, maybe some of you remember the mini disc that should have been the big solution for the music. Practically they sold nothing. The Sony was one of the main crash of Sony after the famous Betamax. That was even worse. That was the way to store the movie from the TV. So both cases are explained in this book were perfectly prepared. So they were really making the right choices, the right design. Unfortunately, it happened something in the technology evolution. For example, in the mini disc, finally it becomes available, the technology for the iPad, and so nobody had the mini disc because everybody bought the iPad. But this was at all not predictable in the moment in which they started to work on their product. So it's not exactly their fault. So what is the way that Michael Raynor somehow tried to overcome this kind of paradox? So the theory is that somehow you should not really commit on some future things, but more create some strategic option. That is, being able to have several strategic options in order to be able to choose among these strategic options as the time passes and the landscape becomes clearer. I know it's not that easy as saying that especially the chief of the companies should not really commit on a specific strategy, but more create more opportunity. So this is really what is the thesis that is very, very interesting. And I want to make another poll with you. And this is market share. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies. Can you identify which companies are there? This is 2007, this is 2016. And this is a case of missing strategic options, so it's not that difficult. Maybe I did it, so it's easy for me, but... Please? Very good. So you win. Now it's there. Yes, this is Nokia. Now the other one are easy to understand. Which one is this one? This was the little brother of Nokia, BlackBerry. Yeah. Who is coming in? The iPhone. And this, Samsung. And the green is Huawei. So what's the point? Nokia was not able to create the strategic option. They were stuck on their business model. And when arrived a new wave of technology, requiring more integration, requiring the possibility to have an ecosystem to make all the application and so on, they were not ready with their software, that was not at all capable to be open and to be used by the various developers to catch up. Then there are a lot of other questions, but it's a very interesting and quite actual example of missing strategic options. It is, they were not at all able to see this possibility and to catch up in time, and they were really the leader in the market. And then we see that Huawei is coming on and can be the next, really the next big one. So there are theses, there are a lot of work from various consultants about what Nokia was wrong about, but okay, we don't care. The point, I mean, no, it's a good, it's a good somehow ecosystem that then use Nokia as a business case. The point is that it did not affect only Nokia. It affected, for example, STMicroelectronics. 20% of our sales, I don't know if I can say it, no, I can say this is public, were related to Nokia. So overnight, 20% of our business was lost. And 20% of the volumes that were running in our fabs disappeared. So also in terms of planning, this was a huge problem. And nobody inside ST ever considered this possibility. So why this? Because at the end, we didn't have, okay, these are other cases of missing strategic option, but this is more. The point is that we had not a what-if approach. I mean, a risk assessment and the what-if approach. This is the one that I learned by sailing. So exactly not applied here. So what is the point? To make and to apply somehow the theory of Michael Raynor to create opportunity. It comes from creating some scenario that has some relevant probability to happen and that clearly have a relevant impact if it happens. I mean, I don't care if something happened and I'm not affected. So how to work? This is I like a lot because yeah. So our long-term planning is the base of the pizza. So we make an exercise where we collect the demand from the groups, the forecast, we analyze, we publish the sales. We have a clear, very nice scenario of what will happen in the next 4 or 5 years. And this is the base. We have a very accurate way to collect all the demand by products. So we are really have a very precise environment. But then there is the customization. And what is the customization? The customization is the what if. I have to understand what if the next mobile phone that we are supplying will not be successful, rather than the next Samsung Note will explode. We were not in the Samsung Note 7 that was exploding, but for sure it's something that can happen. So somehow it's important to separate the base, which is at the end of the good. If you like pizza, you know that all the quality of the pizza depending on the base. No? So you have to create a very good base, but then be able to make the what-if scenario to make this base valuable. And in particular, this I cannot dispatch, okay. I can tell, in August 2013, STMicroelectronics decided to wind down, that is to close, the joint venture that we had made together with Ericsson. We had created a joint venture after the collapse of Nokia. We tried to re-enter in the market of the mobile phones by making this joint venture with Ericsson. We had a lot of good opportunities and good business plan, but end of the day, we realized that we were not strong enough to compete with Samsung, Apple, and so on. So what happened? We decided to close. But before making public this decision, long time before, more than about 1 year before, we started making this scenario. That is, we started from the situation that we had, that is the overall demand for the long term, and we start making the various what if. What if we remove completely the business? What if we keep a part of the business? What if we externalize, and so on and so forth? So we made a lot of this kind of what if in order to try to figure out what would have been the impact, the final impact on our company. So this is somehow the scheme that can be applied to any specific activity. That is, I can decide, I don't know, to close a fab, and I want to see what is the impact on the other fabs by removing the volumes that are today produced there and moved elsewhere. So these are all activities that are run based on the bunch of data and of detailed information that we have based on our standard process, which is the base, the famous base. This is another nice poll, I didn't remember. So who invented the risk assessment? Any idea? So it was Cassandra. So she, we have the famous Cassandra that tried to convince the Trojans that the Athenians were inside the horse. And say, okay, they didn't believe, and they tried to say, okay, but what if they are inside? And she even tried to open the horse to get inside and watch, but they didn't allow her. So finally, she was the first to introduce the risk analysis, because it was at least a little early in the time. But okay, apart from joke, the idea is that when you make risk assessment, you always run the risk that the risk will not materialize. So it clearly, if they should have believed her, most probably she would have not as famous as she is. So, but the point is that you have to analyze the risk, and eventually, if the risk will not materialize, so far so good, no problem. So we don't have to be shy in identifying potential risk that actually will not then happen in the reality. So this is important because at the end, it's somehow it can be a little problematic, because you go to one of your division which is very successful, and you start challenging them that maybe they will fail. So it's not exactly what they expect to listen to. So the typical way to schematize this risk assessment is once more starting from the pizza, from the base of the pizza, which is the bottom-up demand that we receive, which is somehow also already structured. It's not a single layer of demand, but is a layered demand. We separated the demand, the commercial demand, into core, which should be the basic part of the demand that should be somehow safe. The core plus risk, which is the one that we commit on, but anyway, we know has some risk inside. And finally, an additional layer of opportunity where we have some potential business opportunity that could materialize or not. So we start already from a layer structure, and then we analyze at the BU level, that is at the smaller entity of business that we have. We are separated in group, subgroup, division, and business unit. So the business unit is really the smaller entity that look at the business. And we try to correlate their forecast with the market evolution, with the growth driver that they are declaring, to understand if their layerization, because this layerization is provided directly by the groups, is somehow consistent, or if there are additional risks that were not identified by them. So somehow we try to challenge their activity in order, because somehow, you know, it depends also from the period. In this period, everybody is optimistic, so they don't see any risk. A few years ago, last year, everybody was pessimistic, so the risk was extremely higher. So we need somehow to act to mitigate also this tendency, which is somehow driven by the today's situation. So somehow we try to schematize this activity or risk assessment by segmenting our BUs into three main categories. Clearly, these numbers are not real, because I cannot tell. So there is a main group, which are the BU that are actually growing more than the market. There is a second group of BUs that are not that much growing, but are strategic for any reason, either because they are strategic for their business or strategic for the fab where they produce. And finally, there is a third group of business units which are not growing or are legacy or are decreasing. Why this segmentation? Because I will mostly focalize on the growing business unit, because I know that where there is much growth, there will be much risk. So I will tend not to disperse too much energy on all the company, but more focusing on the one growing more. And eventually on some of the strategic, if there could be an impact that I consider as important for the company. So then I go through a standard risk analysis process by consensus meeting, by identifying the risk, making the various possible activity in order to arrive to the best consensus with the division about this famous risk assessment for this specific view. And one tool that can be very helpful is, for example, the WSTS forecast, because they segment in a very detailed way the evolution of the market with some macro category. So if these categories fit with your view, the more they fit, the more you have practically a micro sum of your business. So you can somehow really see how your view is compared with the market. The more this category is big and involves, for example, for this one is a huge one, so you don't even see exactly if the trend is really correlated. So when you have a good fit, this is a very useful tool in order to check if the trend that is given for your view is consistent with the market. One caveat, one thing to be careful, is that if I have a big customer inside, then it's useless to look at the market. I mean, if I have Samsung, Apple, whatever inside, I should better segregate this product and check the rest of the demand without this big product, because this will completely overwhelm, completely hide the standard market evolution, okay? So here is really a segmentation. You first remove the big customer, and then you look at the market evolution. First target, this is easier because, big data, everybody knows that we collect a huge amount of data, and the point is how to extract simple information from here. So here I like to report this paradox, which is come from James Cascio, which is the more certain and detailed the forecast, the more people will accept and believe it to be useful. So this is nice, not really too much to do with the big data, but just because it's interesting in terms of forecast. This is, you look at the weather forecast for 2 weeks from now, and they tell you that at 11 a.m. it will rain, but clearly this is not a forecast. But you see it on the screen and you believe because it's very precise, and so it appears to be very accurate, but it's not accurate. So once more, the point is that for any data, we have to consider somehow the accuracy that this data has. And to do that, what we normally do is to track the accuracy that the BU has had in the previous forecast. We normally use the lag 1 year or lag 2 year, which is the way that you target, for example, the Q1 17, the quarter, which is an actual, and I see in Q1 16, which was the forecast that was given for Q1 17. The delta is the error that they did. And they do it for each quarter, so it somehow is not coming from the same exercise, but it's the composition of several exercises, each for each quarter. So for Q1 17, I will take the exercise of Q1 16. For Q4 16, I will take Q4 15, and so on and so forth. In this way, this is the technique which is named lag 1 year, I can build a sort of accuracy. And I can project also for a 2 years lag. So I look at Q1 17 from Q1 15 perspective. And I see how good is this business unit in the mid-long-term forecasting. In this way, when I look at the forecast of this BU, which I invented here, this blue, I can tell, okay, in the short term, they can be probably right, but as far as I go further, there will be a certain spread based on the accuracy that they demonstrated in the past. These are some very basic, let's say, tips of the day-to-day activities. So our life is a continuous aggregation and disaggregation of data. We start from data which are very, very detailed, because we have a large number of products, large number of technology, and we typically target 15-time buckets in a 5-year plan. So we have really a huge amount of data. But then, when I have to present the analysis, I have to aggregate and show maybe for macro technology. For example, only for some advanced logic technology, what is the trend? But then when I see some spike, I have to come back and say, what is the spike? So I have maybe to come back to a product level to understand if the spike is something associated to all the trend of the technology, or if there is some specific product that is creating that. So this is why I used to put this picture, because this is our actual activities to aggregate and disaggregate the data. And we do it so often that at the end here is good to have some automatic tool of any kind, but depending on your application, that helps you in managing this huge amount of data in a quick way and without crashing your PC too many times. Because when you do it with Excel, you crash, typically. At least we crash. Once more, details. This is quite important as well as the speed, because being a central function, we are asked to provide information for on Friday night, on Thursday evening. So it's just a matter to have something that you can manage very quickly. And once more, the complexity. So we start from a consistent set of data. Maybe this I did not stress, but it's quite important. It is all the data that we collect are consistent among each other. That is, we collect the million pieces that we finally sell with the wafers that are needed to produce and with the dollars that will be sold at the end. And all this set of data are consistent among themselves, which is quite the fundamental of this. And they are detailed with all this bunch of details which create the complexity of the database. Clearly, one of the main challenges is the last minute. So we typically receive the very last minute update when the system has already been loaded, everybody's happy, we go live, and then say, you know what, this product has failed, so we have to cancel the forecast, we have to change. So the point is that versus the ideal world, as also the person before anticipated, then there is the real world where you have to manage some last-minute change. And here, really, the point is to have a system which is flexible enough to put inside this very last-minute change, because you cannot ignore. The last thing that we can do is go in front of the top management and say, you know what, okay, it's not updated because the system is not updated. This doesn't work, I can grant. So this is the real challenge, and so the system that you have to choose is a system where you can really introduce easily this kind of last minute. And at the end, also related to this is the point that finally we have a continuous change. So we used to work with some specific exercise once a quarter. We see that more and more this is not anymore adequate to the continuous change and to the nervosity of the market. So the idea that I'm trying to propose is to have a baseline of the standard quarterly exercise, but to have a sort of continuous update of the long-term planning to introduce let's say, the specific update on some major programs. This could allow to have somehow a base of data that you don't have to rebuild continuously because it would be a huge activity, but at the same time to have a good representation of the reality, maybe introducing the last upside or downside of the big customer. So here I put the mozzarella, because mozzarella you have to buy and to eat during the day, so this is a super fresh approach.